What happens when the actors behind the camera were even more dangerous than the roles they played? This isn't about the characters. They're legends for what they did in real life. Fist fights, affairs, mob ties, blacklists, and breakdowns. These weren't just stars. They were feared. By studios, by directors, sometimes by the law. These are the 20 most dangerous and feared actors in old Hollywood history. And trust us, you don't know half the stories. Stick around to find out who clashed with the mob, who vanished on set, and who brought chaos wherever they went. Let's get into it. James Cagney, the real-life tough guy. Behind the gangster mask. James Cagney wasn't just a movie gangster. He was the gangster, at least that's how it felt when you watched him. His snappy delivery, explosive movements, and ice-cold stare made audiences believe he could slap you across the face through the screen. But what made Cagney truly feared in real life wasn't the roles he played. It was the man he really was behind the camera. Cagney grew up tough on the streets of New York, and that grit stayed with him his entire life. He wasn't one to back down, especially when it came to standing up for himself or others. In the 1930s, at the height of the studio system's power, he fought back against Hollywood's biggest bullies, the moguls themselves. At a time when most actors feared being blacklisted, Cagney called out Warner Brothers for shortchanging him, and even threatened to sue them for breaching his contract. One insider claimed he once stormed into a meeting and told a top executive, "Try that again and I'll knock you flat." That kind of boldness was rare and terrifying to those in charge. But it wasn't just his battles in the boardroom. Cagney also had deep ties to the early labor movement in Hollywood, helping organize the Screen Actors Guild at a time when mob influence and studio intimidation made that kind of activism dangerous. Studio bosses feared Cagney not because he was reckless, but because he was fearless. He once said, "You dirty rat, I never said that," a misquoted line that became his catchphrase. But the truth is, he didn't need a catchphrase to be memorable. His entire presence was a warning. Don't mess with me. And unlike many actors who became softer with fame, Cagney stayed razor-sharp until he retired. While Cagney fought the system from the inside with fists and fire, our next actor fought from the outside, with chaos, charisma, and a personality no one could contain. Marlon Brando, the rebel who refused to behave. If James Dean was the poster boy for rebellion, then Marlon Brando was the revolution itself. Brando didn't just act, he disrupted. On screen, he was magnetic. Off screen, he was a force of nature. Directors feared working with him, not because he lacked talent, but because he had so much of it, and he used it to bulldoze over anyone who got in his way. Brando made history with A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront, but he hated Hollywood's rules. He refused to stick to scripts, often changed lines on set, and if he didn't like how things were going, he'd purposely sabotage a scene. One director said, "Working with Brando is like taming a wild animal. You never know when it'll bite." He also had a volcanic temper and would storm off set for days. His love life was just as wild, filled with affairs, broken marriages, and scandals that kept the tabloids in business. It wasn't uncommon for Brando to show up hungover or not show up at all. But despite it all, his performances were untouchable. That made him dangerous, because no matter what chaos he caused, the camera still loved him. Behind all of it was a deep resentment for authority. Brando didn't trust studios, didn't trust critics, and barely trusted himself. He once said, "The only reason I'm in Hollywood is because I don't have the moral courage to refuse the money." Even at his most powerful, he remained a rebel. If Brando was the dangerous rebel, then Errol Flynn was the charming pirate, until you looked behind the smile and saw the storm waiting underneath. Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler. With a sinister edge, Errol Flynn was the dashing rogue every man wanted to be and every woman dreamed about, until his private life spilled into public scandal. With a grin that could melt diamonds and sword-fighting skills that made him a legend, Flynn was Hollywood's original bad boy. But behind that image was something darker, much darker. Flynn lived life like it was one long party. His appetite for women, alcohol, and drugs was legendary. But what made him truly feared were the allegations that followed. In the 1940s, Flynn was accused twice of statutory rape. Though he was acquitted, the trials revealed shocking details that changed how people saw him. Hollywood insiders whispered stories of blackmail, coercion, and Flynn's habit of using his fame to get whatever he wanted, whoever he wanted. Flynn didn't care what anyone thought. He once bragged, "I like my whiskey old and my women young." That quote didn't age well, and neither did his reputation. By the 1950s, studios were wary of casting him. Directors dreaded his unreliability. His co-stars tiptoed around him, afraid of what mood he might be in. Even his memoir, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, reads more like a confession than a biography. In it, Flynn showed zero remorse. He flaunted his sins like trophies, confirming what many feared. The man behind the hero was dangerous, and proud of it. From the reckless pirate, we shift to the man with the sharp tongue and even sharper temper, Humphrey Bogart, whose charm couldn't hide his darker moods. Humphrey Bogart, the drunken cynic with a mean streak. Humphrey Bogart was one of Hollywood's greatest icons, known for his roles in Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, and The Big Sleep. On screen, he was all cool confidence and romantic cynicism. But off-screen, Bogart was no gentle leading man. He was rough, rude, and ruthless when pushed too far. Bogart was known to drink a lot. His favorite haunt, Romanoff's, Obécami, was often the scene of his drunken antics. When he drank, his personality changed. He'd insult directors, berate co-stars, and even threaten physical fights. One producer called him an actor you loved in the theater but feared in your office. He clashed with everyone, from studio execs to crew members. During one famous incident, Bogart refused to come out of his trailer for hours, yelling that the script was garbage and the director was a hack. But his talent was undeniable, and that made studios put up with his behavior. Bogart's marriage to Lauren Bacall was legendary, but even that had its dark moments. He was possessive, jealous, and quick to anger. Still, Bacall later said, he was difficult, but he was also brilliant. Bogart's on-screen cool was real, but it came from a place of pain, control, and fire. That's what made him so dangerous. He didn't pretend to be perfect. He wore his flaws like armor. And now we come to a man whose danger wasn't just reputation. It was real. With mob ties, mystery, and a smile that made people sweat, George Raft walked straight out of a noir film and into legend. George Raft, the mobbed-up movie star. George Raft didn't just play gangsters, he knew them. Born in Hell's Kitchen, New York, Raft ran with real criminals long before he ever stepped in front of a camera. He was close friends with Bugsy Siegel and other notorious mobsters, and that reputation followed him into Hollywood. Producers feared him not just for what he might do, but for what he might bring. Rumors swirled that Raft had mob enforcers on speed dial. He reportedly turned down major roles, including in The Godfather, because he didn't want to offend his underworld friends. That loyalty was dangerous, and studios knew it. He was involved in behind-the-scenes negotiations where people got hurt. Some said Raft helped settle disputes with threats and intimidation. He had a code of silence and a deadly kind of charm. Directors rarely crossed him, and actors knew better than to mess around. One Hollywood insider once whispered, "If Raft didn't like you, you didn't work." That wasn't paranoia. That was power. Raft's on-screen roles mirrored his off-screen life so closely that it was hard to tell where the character ended and the man began. And maybe that's what made him so dangerous. Because in George Raft's world, the line between Hollywood and the mob was razor-thin. Robert Mitchum, the outlaw actor. Robert Mitchum was the embodiment of the Hollywood tough guy. With his droopy eyes, deadpan delivery, and a voice that rumbled like distant thunder, he became the face of film noir and the anti-hero archetype. But Mitchum's off-screen persona was just as formidable as his on-screen characters. Born in 1917, Mitchum's early life was marked by hardship. He was a drifter, a boxer, and even served time on a chain gang. These experiences infused his performances with an authenticity that resonated with audiences. He once quipped, "I've survived because I was tougher than the tough guys." Mitchum's disdain for Hollywood's pretenses was legendary. He often mocked the very industry that made him a star, saying, "Movies bore me, especially my own." His arrest in 1948 for marijuana possession could have ended his career, but Mitchum shrugged it off, turning the scandal into a badge of honor. Directors found him both captivating and exasperating. He had a reputation for showing up late, if at all, and for challenging authority on set. Yet, his performances were magnetic, drawing audiences into the complex, often morally ambiguous worlds he inhabited. While Mitchum's rebellion was rooted in a rugged authenticity, our next actor wielded charm and intellect as his weapons of choice, captivating Hollywood with his enigmatic presence. Warren Beatty, the charmer who broke hearts and rules. Warren Beatty was the quintessential Hollywood heartthrob, but beneath the suave exterior lay a shrewd strategist who navigated the industry on his own terms. Born in 1937, Beatty's rise to fame was meteoric, with roles in films like Splendor in the Grass and Bonnie and Clyde cementing his status as a leading man. Beatty's reputation as a ladies' man was well-earned, with numerous high-profile romances that kept the tabloids busy. However, it was his control over his projects that truly set him apart. He often took on multiple roles: actor, producer, director, ensuring his vision was realized. He once remarked, "The biggest mistake is believing that you can control everything. The second biggest is believing that you can't." His perfectionism and insistence on creative control made him a formidable figure in Hollywood. Directors and producers knew that working with Beatty meant ceding a significant amount of authority. Yet, his films often garnered critical acclaim and box office success, validating his methods. Beatty's blend of charm, intelligence, and determination made him both admired and feared in the industry. He was a man who played by his own rules and often rewrote them entirely. From Beatty's calculated charisma, we turn to an actor whose vulnerability and inner turmoil made him one of Hollywood's most enigmatic figures. Montgomery Clift, the beautiful tragedy. Montgomery Clift was the embodiment of the tortured artist. With his chiseled features and intense gaze, he brought a raw emotional depth to his roles that captivated audiences. But Clift's personal life was fraught with pain and inner conflict. Born in 1920, Clift's early success in films like A Place in the Sun and From Here to Eternity made him a sought-after leading man. However, a devastating car accident in 1956 left him with severe facial injuries, leading to a reliance on painkillers and alcohol. He once said, "I have the same problem as James Dean. Too many people want to see me die." Clift's struggles with his sexuality in a less accepting era added to his emotional burden. He maintained a private life, often retreating from the Hollywood spotlight. His performances post-accident were marked by a haunting vulnerability that mirrored his personal battles. Despite his demons, Clift's dedication to his craft never wavered. He was a pioneer of method acting, bringing a level of realism to his roles that influenced generations of actors. While Clift's internal struggles consumed him, our next actor channeled his rebellious spirit into a persona that defined cool for an entire generation. Steve McQueen, the king of cool with a dangerous edge. Steve McQueen was the epitome of cool, a rugged individualist who brought a quiet intensity to the screen. Born in 1930, McQueen's troubled youth and stint in the Marine Corps shaped his tough guy image. He once stated, "I live for myself and answer to nobody." McQueen's performances in films like Bullitt and The Great Escape showcased his penchant for action and his disdain for authority. He performed his own stunts, raced cars and motorcycles, and had a reputation for being difficult on set. His rebellious nature made him both a box office draw and a challenge for directors. Off-screen, McQueen's life was equally tumultuous. He had a volatile temper, struggled with substance abuse, and was known for his numerous affairs. Yet, his charisma and undeniable talent kept audiences enthralled. McQueen's legacy as the King of Cool endures, a testament to his ability to captivate audiences with a smoldering intensity that was uniquely his own. From McQueen's rebellious charm, we move to an actor whose commanding presence and off-screen controversies earned him the title of the King of Hollywood. Clark Gable, the King, who played rough Clark Gable, was the quintessential leading man of Hollywood's golden age. With his confident demeanor and signature mustache, he became an icon through roles in films like Gone with the Wind. However, Gable's off-screen life was marked by a roughness that contrasted with his polished image. Born in 1901, Gable's early years were spent in working-class environments, which instilled in him a ruggedness that he carried throughout his life. He once remarked, "The only reason they come to see me is that I know that life is 10 to 1 against." Gable's relationships were often tumultuous. His affair with actress Loretta Young resulted in a child, a fact that was concealed for decades. He was also known for his heavy drinking and womanizing, behaviors that were often overlooked due to his star status. Despite these controversies, Gable remained a dominant force in Hollywood. His commanding presence and undeniable talent kept him at the forefront of the industry, even as his personal life raised eyebrows. As we reflect on Gable's complex legacy, we prepare to explore the lives of other iconic actors who, like him, left indelible marks on Hollywood through their formidable personas and unforgettable performances. Spencer Tracy, the drunk with a dangerous secret. Spencer Tracy was one of the finest actors of his generation, respected, adored, and nearly untouchable on screen. But behind his award-winning performances and calm demeanor was a man deeply tormented. Known for his professionalism when the cameras rolled, Tracy was feared off-set for a reason few people dared to speak aloud. His alcoholism turned him into someone else entirely. When sober, Tracy was thoughtful and reserved. But when drunk, and he often was, He became aggressive, moody, and at times completely unhinged. He would disappear for days, locked in hotel rooms with bottles, unreachable to anyone, including directors waiting on set. Spence was brilliant, one co-star said, but you never knew which Spence you were going to get. His long-running affair with Katharine Hepburn was one of Hollywood's most whispered secrets. They never married. Tracy remained legally bound to his estranged wife. But their romance was real and stormy. Hepburn once admitted she spent as much time worrying about him as she did loving him. His mood swings, fueled by guilt, religion, and addiction, made their relationship a balancing act between devotion and survival. What made Tracy feared was that even studios couldn't control him. They tiptoed around his drinking, avoided confronting his volatile behavior, and gave him special treatment that kept others away. He wasn't just dangerous to himself, he was dangerous to anyone who got close. He had power, and he had demons. And when the two clashed, no one could stop him. While Spencer Tracy's danger stemmed from deep personal battles, our next actor wore his threat on his sleeve. An outspoken man who challenged the government, paid the price, and never lived to tell the full story. John Garfield, the political threat. John Garfield never fit the mold of a typical Hollywood leading man. He came from the streets of New York, and that toughness never left him. His performances were raw, emotional, and unforgettable. But what made Garfield truly feared in old Hollywood wasn't his acting. It was his politics. In the late 1940s, during the height of the Red Scare, Garfield's name landed on the blacklist. Suspected of communist sympathies and accused of refusing to name names, he quickly became a target of the FBI and House Un-American Activities Committee. While others bowed under pressure, Garfield stood defiant. He refused to betray his friends. "I have nothing to confess," he once said. That courage came with consequences. Studios distanced themselves. Projects vanished. The roles stopped coming. Garfield was essentially erased from Hollywood because of what he believed, not what he did. But it was his refusal to bend that made him so dangerous in the eyes of the system. He couldn't be controlled, bought, or broken, and that terrified people in power. By the time he was 39, Garfield was a shell of the star he once was. On May 21, 1952, he died of a heart attack, alone in a New York City apartment. Many believe the government pressure, the blacklisting, and the betrayal he endured took a toll on his health. Garfield wasn't feared because of violence or chaos. He was feared because he stood up when others sat down. From quiet resistance to loud destruction, our next actor lit up the screen with brilliance but tore through life like a storm, leaving broken glass and broken hearts in his wake. Richard Burton, the wild Welshman. Richard Burton didn't walk into a room. He crashed into it, voice booming, whiskey in hand, charm flowing like a tide. He was one of the most magnetic actors of his time, yet one of the most feared by directors, studios, and even his co-stars. Burton didn't just choose scenery, he burned it down. Behind his rich Shakespearean voice and piercing eyes was a man constantly at war with himself. He hated the fame he couldn't escape. Loved a woman, Elizabeth Taylor, with such intensity that it bordered on destruction, and drank with the fury of a man trying to silence a screaming mind. Burton once said, "I have to think hard to name an interesting man who does not drink." He fought with directors, walked off sets, and once destroyed a hotel suite in Rome during a rage-filled night. His relationship with Taylor was tabloid gold. Two superstars tangled in love, jealousy, and ego. Their fights were legendary, their reconciliations just as dramatic. Studios feared him for good reason. You could cast Burton, but you couldn't manage him. You could hope he showed up, but couldn't guarantee he'd be sober. Yet when the camera rolled, he was brilliant. That tension, that danger, is what made him magnetic. But while Burton's chaos burned hot, our next actor played it cool, on the surface. Underneath the tuxedo and dry wit was a man who carried his own darkness, cloaked in Bond's signature swagger. Sean Connery, the cold fury beneath 007. Sean Connery's portrayal of James Bond made him a global icon. He was smooth, fearless, and devastatingly charming. But off-screen, Connery's temper and attitudes made him one of the most feared men in Hollywood, particularly by those who worked closely with him. Connery didn't mince words, and he didn't suffer fools. His mood could flip in an instant, turning a professional set into a minefield of tension. He was known to explode on directors, co-stars, and producers if he felt disrespected. "There's nothing wrong with hitting a woman," he once said in an infamous interview, a quote that haunted his legacy and revealed a disturbing side of the man behind Bond. His views on women, his brutal honesty, and his sometimes violent outbursts were not just old school, they were dangerous. Many actresses spoke of feeling uneasy around him. Crew members said his presence could freeze a room. Studios, while desperate for his box office power, were careful to control his public image, knowing full well what lurked beneath. And yet, his talent was undeniable. Connery commanded the screen in every role, bringing weight and gravitas few could match. But the edge he brought to Bond wasn't just acting, it was Sean. That cold fury was real. From tightly coiled anger to untamed madness, our final entry is a man who embodied chaos in every way. He didn't pretend to be wild. He was wild. And you never knew what would happen when he stepped on set. Oliver Reed, the madman of British cinema. Oliver Reed didn't just act. He roared. He was Hollywood's wildest man, a walking bar fight with a film contract. There was nothing subtle about him. Directors feared him, actors braced for him, and producers crossed their fingers that he'd at least make it to the second week of filming before things went off the rails. Reed was a brilliant performer, capable of incredible intensity on screen. But off-camera, he drank like it was a competitive sport. He'd show up late, belligerent, or not at all. Once, during a night out in Malta, he reportedly downed a dozen beers, a half bottle of whiskey, and still insisted on shooting the next morning. The crew, terrified. He fought co-stars, insulted journalists, and smashed his way through hotel rooms. His unpredictability became legend. "I don't live in the real world," Reed once said. "I live in Oliver's world." And in Oliver's world, anything could happen, and usually did. Yet despite the madness, he kept getting work. Why? Because when he did show up, he was electric. Reed wasn't dangerous like a villain in a movie. He was dangerous like a lit firework, bright, loud, and ready to explode. Those were the legends who didn't just break the rules, they rewrote them. From wild outbursts to fearless rebellion, they made Hollywood history for all the wrong and right reasons. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit like, drop a comment, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.